Welcome to Living It with Chris Waddell. I am with one of my good friends, great racer, 13-time Paralympic medalist, Jeff Adams from Canada. Jeff, I loved watching Jeff on the race, on the course or on the track. And really, we will get to this to what he did so well, but he had a bit of genius on the track and we will get to that. But let's go back a little bit. And can you tell me what were you like as a kid? I mean, I've only known you as an adult. So were you the same as a kid or?
Yeah, I feel like there's not a lot of difference between my childhood me and my adult me in a lot of ways. um, but I was a really precocious kid. I mean, I loved sports. Anything I could get my hands on, I did. I played hockey with my friends on the street and in a rink. And, I'm Canadian, so it was a pretty natural sport for me to pick up. But I'd also been identified as a potential high level performer in gymnastics. So even like when I was 7, 8 years old, I was training with a gymnastics club near the small town that I grew up in that ended up they turned out a ton of Olympic athletes. And so I was training with people who went on to, compete at the Olympics in gymnastics and learning, the basic movements that, really dictate whether or not you can perform in any sport. Gymnastics is so transferable to anything.
Yeah, that strength, that kinesthetic awareness. There's so many things that are proprioception and all these things that are just so important in gymnastics, but also in whatever else you're going to do. It's a great foundational sport. And but I mean, you were young, right? I mean, this is up until 9 years old, right?
Yeah, I had a cancer when I was an infant that the radiation therapy that I got ended up burning my spine, but the effects didn't occur for 8 years, and 8 years after the treatment. So I got the treatment as a 1 year old. The radiation burned my spine, just microscopic little burns. And when I actually got tackled on the school grounds, a pretty hard tackle, and it caused one of the burns to burst, and the bruising and the bleeding caused the spinal cord injury that I have.
And so what happened? Like, how did this manifest itself? Because you weren't preparing for it, right? It was just one of those things.
No, and it came out of the blue in a lot of ways because like I had the cancer as an infant, and then walked away from it. So when I started getting these symptoms, not being able to, not being able to move my feet the right way, because it progressed. Like as the bleed happened, it progressed. It got worse. And so when I went back in the hospital, they were like, "Oh, he's got cancer again." And so I was put onto an oncology ward, and they started doing cancer tests. They had no idea that they just didn't, because of the span of time, they just didn't connect the dots between the radiation therapy and the bleed and the paralysis that it was causing.
That's amazing. So it's like scar tissue effectively that you had that then burst kind of thing, or
Yeah, the radiation caused what they're called multicavernous angiomas. So it's a malformation of a blood vessel, and it's caused either through genetics or as a result of radiation. Those are really the only two things that can cause them. So but they didn't, like I said, they didn't connect the dots because it had been 8 years, and it's such a rare thing to occur with radiation therapy that they just didn't. And the testing at the time, like there weren't CAT scans the same way that there are now. It was in the late 70s, and so the diagnostics just weren't as refined as they are today. So we spent a long time in the diagnostic process, and they for a long time thought that it was the cancer had come back and was manifesting itself by pushing on my spine or something like that. But the burn was actually it caused malformations of veins, and that those burst, and so it was a bleed more than anything that caused it was a bruise basically that caused the spinal cord injury.
interesting. Now, but it manifested itself in weird ways too, right? As a little precocious kid, you used to bound across the kitchen and these kinds of things, and all of a sudden you couldn't make it, right? Is this how it happened? I mean, where you start seeing this and your parents are looking at you like, what's wrong with this kid? What's going on?
Well, that's a bit of a funny part of the story because I was such a little actor. Like I just loved performing. That's part of why I love gymnastics, is the performative part of it. And so my parents thought I was faking it just for attention. And so for the first week or so, they were like, "Pick your feet up, like stop doing that." And and I kept saying like, I can't do this. And they finally brought me in, and it was just coincidental timing. They brought me to the hospital. They realized something was going on. They didn't know what. They checked me in, and overnight, I went from being able to kind of walk around to being completely paralyzed. So that didn't help my case because my parents were like, come on, like, we check into the hospital and now you can't even walk. And so it just didn't, like, I didn't do myself any favors with the diagnostic process because it was so confusing to begin with. And then my personality just, because I was a joker, right? Like I was constantly playing practical jokes on my brothers and my parents. And they're just like, oh, this is a really bad joke. Like, this is not funny.
This isn't, stop that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, racing was such a huge part of what you did. Did you know that you would race? So like, I mean, what did you think? At 9 years old, you go from being able to walk to suddenly not being able to walk, being a gymnast, being a hockey player, to what are you going to do? Did you know you'd race? What was that available or?
No, well, I mean, like a lot of people who get injured, you go into the rehab center and you're pushed to do sport of some kind, because for people with disabilities, it's even, maintaining your health is even more important.
Sure.
And so I was pushed to do basketball because that was what everyone did. And so I did basketball, but I was really lucky. There was a therapist named Ann Shugart who was also into track and field. And so she encouraged me to try, I was throwing javelin, and, like, out in the back.
These are like 50-pound stainless steel hospital chairs, right? This isn't.
Yeah. So when I first started playing basketball, like, we basically were playing in our everyday chairs. And then the chairs started getting better and better. I was right on the cusp of where they started to build chairs out of aluminum and so on. But my first racing chair was given to me by one of the basketball players, and it was a stainless steel chair with big back wheels. And when I was playing basketball, I was always the fastest one on the court. And one of the coaches at one point said, you should really go try racing because you might be good at that too. I was pretty good. I was a pretty good basketball player. I was close to making the national team when I was 17, and didn't make the national team when I was 17. I was really upset about that because I thought I should. And part of the decision to go race was that whoever crosses the finish line first wins. Like, there's no judging. You don't get selected for a team based on some subjective evaluation of your potential. It's just, you cross the line, you win or you lose. And so when I was trying to decide what to do, it just seemed like I could control the outcome a lot better, because I could select myself onto a team by performing as best I could and winning races. Whereas in basketball, my age, I was only 17. I was probably outperforming some of the existing players on at least the provincial team, maybe the national team, but I wasn't getting selected because of my age. And so I was like, well, have fun, guys. I'm going to go race.
Yeah, I'm done with this. So 1980, you became paralyzed around 1980, right?
Yeah, 79.
79. So then Terry Fox was running across Canada in
Mm-hmm.
1980. Did that have an effect on you and how you saw yourself? I mean, you were a young kid, so you don't understand everything, obviously, but.
Yeah, it was, I think it affected everyone in Canada. Like, it was just such a major event. Yeah, so Terry Fox was a guy. He lost his leg to cancer, and he was an athlete. He was a volleyball player in high school, very, very talented athlete, and ended up playing basketball at a very high level as well, wheelchair basketball at a very high level as well after he lost his leg. But he decided to do a cross-country run to raise awareness and funds for cancer awareness and research, and started on the East Coast. Dipped his prosthetic leg in the water in the ocean on the East Coast, and the plan was he was going to run all the way to the West Coast and dip his prosthetic leg in the West Coast, the ocean on the West Coast, and sort of tie the country together. Unfortunately, his run was cut short about halfway through in Thunder Bay, where the cancer returned and made it impossible for him to finish the run. But we still do. I think the runs have expanded around the world. I did one in Dubai one year when I was there racing. I happened to be there racing and did the Terry Fox run in Dubai. So we've got these runs around the world now in memory of Terry Fox and to commemorate his efforts to raise awareness and money.
Because he just put himself out there. I mean, just sweat equity to raise money for cancer research. And I read something that said that the organization has raised $750 million for cancer research. So pretty amazing what one person can do.
Yeah, it's one of the most successful campaigns that I know of. And he's vintage, like his vintage is around when Rick Hansen was racing, and those guys. And he was part of a bunch of really good basketball teams. And I don't think he ever raced, but he was an incredible athlete on top.
And you mentioned Rick Hansen as well. So Rick was a racer, but he went around the world to raise money for spinal cord research as well, right?
Yeah, so Rick did his Man in Motion tour. I think that started in '85 or '86. He spent a couple years traveling the world, and did a lot of things incorrectly. Went against the trade winds and uphill for most of the way. He made if he had done a little bit more planning, as the story goes. Anyway, he could have made the trip a lot easier on himself. But he left at the peak of his career too. Like in '86, he was challenging for Boston, racing against George Murray and Andre Vigier and those guys, and winning. He won the Orange Bowl Marathon a couple times, and he was, the Pan Ams. He was just ferocious, and he left the circuit to go and do this, awareness campaign for spinal cord research, and ended up really, really destroying his shoulders in the process, and just never came back to racing. So that was, but his campaign has been, his foundation still exists, does a lot of good work, especially in the political spheres.
Did those guys become heroes for you in any sense, or shape how you looked at yourself as an athlete or what you wanted to do? Or
not really, because I was removed from them. The people that I really looked up to were people that were in my life in more than a fleeting way or a tangential way. Like Flo Akima was a basketball player who really took me under his wing. He was the national team, probably the star of the national team at that point, and really taught me a lot of values about sport, not just about basketball, but about respect for your opponents and putting everything you are into the sport and really dedicating yourself. And just, things like that kids need to learn. And so he was coaching me when I was 15, 16, 17, and really made sure that I understood those fundamentals and things that really matter about sport.
And then who were your heroes on the racing side?
I mean, the biggest figure in my racing life would have been Andre Vigier. When I came along, he was pretty close to the top of his game, although he stayed at the top of his game for a decade or more.
Right. So French-Canadian guy, won Boston, variety of other things.
Yeah, he was most well-known and probably best at the marathon distance, and the harder it was, the better it was for Andre. Like if it was uphill in the snow against the wind, he'd win that race every single time. Right? He's just the toughest guy. I think probably to this day the toughest racer I've ever met, possibly toughest athlete. But he was just. I remember one time we were at training camp one time, and a bunch of the Quebec guys were really talented. And we were there down in Florida for training camp, and Andre was destroying us in every workout, and guys were getting tired of it, right? So Mark Kessy, who was another one of the Quebec racers, put WD-40 on his push rings before we went up for the training session. And it didn't do us any good, right? Like he still destroyed us, but he got mad, which hurt us. So he was pissed off, and even with this, I don't even know how he was pushing, but he still hurt us badly, and then was mad about it as well. But it was just, you couldn't do anything to the guy that would hurt him. It was incredible.
And to explain some of that too, the push rims are rubber coated, and you have, at that point, it might have been a while ago, so it might have been that you had taped gloves, like handball gloves or whatever, and it's really the friction. You're not grabbing onto the push rim. So if the push rim is slippery, which happens in the rain and those kinds of things, then you're slipping. And Andre, it had no ill effect on him, just on the rest of you.
Yeah, it'd be like taking the soles off of someone's running shoes. Like you're running in dress shoes, like they're just slippery and you can't get a grip. Like that was what we did to him, and he still destroyed us. Yeah, he was
well, he won the Boston Marathon in 1987 when there was the big crash, right? So he crashed along with Knob, who I think was the first guy to go over, and was part of that huge crash down in that downhill, which effectively, up until recently, they had a controlled start at Boston to minimize the risk. But he fell over, crashed, got back up, and actually won at Boston that year.
Yeah, and I remember the first time I beat Andre was at Nationals. in the 1500. The first time I beat him in the 1500 was at Nationals. And there was a crash with about, I want to say, like just going into the turn with 200 meters to go, and two guys in front crashed, and Andre and I were behind those two guys. He was on the inside, I was on the outside, and I was able to exit to the outside of the track and avoid the crash. And I was just like, oh my God, there's a crash. You're like, I got away. I got to like put everything I have into this. So I put my head down and I was just going as fast as I could, 200 meters to go, hoping that I was going to win this race. And I heard him behind me, and just this like grunting, you know, and it was getting closer and closer and closer. And it was the most scared I've ever been in my racing career. And I ended up beating him. But the video afterwards was of the crash, and the two guys go down, and there's video of me like, you know, squirting out the side, and he grabs the frames and throws them away and goes in between them to then chase me down. Like it was, yeah, he's a legend.
He was a superhero, and it really was. It was the grunting and snorting, and you knew when he was around you.
Yeah, he was so loud. Yeah, he like you said, he's just grunting all the time and making this noise, all like pro tennis players do, you know. But you knew exactly where he was all the time. I don't know if he did it in part to intimidate people, but it scared me.
Well, that partially, I think, gets to one of your greatest talents. I mean, you said you squirted out around this crash. Watching you, I always thought that was something that you did well, that you were so slippery on the track. Nobody could ever really box you in. Is that what you considered your greatest skill, or what did you consider your greatest skill on the track?
Yeah, I think you're right. Every race I won on tactics. Like I never really won a race if it was just pure, you know, fitness or pure strength. It was always being positioned correctly at the right time, not getting boxed, putting people into places that, you know, were bad positions for them. And I had an ability to, once I got better, because I could out sprint a lot of people, I could control from the back. So people were so worried about me at the back of a pack that it would change the dynamic of a race. And so I developed my talents to do that, specifically to do that. And I made a decision to be less fit than some of the guys who were really fit, but faster than anyone else. And so there are a lot of times, like going through the prelims, when guys would just wind it up and go as fast as they could. Those were the races that were the most difficult for me. Like often I would barely get through the semis into the final and then dominate the final, because the strategies and the tactics are just so different from the preliminary rounds to the final. And I was more suited to racing in a final with a lot of top guys than I was to racing the prelims. And I also didn't do very well when there were races where there was only one or two other top guys in the race. So when I was racing at sort of not the major events, where a couple of guys could team up and just go really, really hard and hurt me, that was when I was at a disadvantage. But when there were a lot of guys and everyone wanted to win, and the tactics took over, that's when I had my best races.
You weren't opposed to fighting for your position as well.
No, I was not. Very nearly got disqualified a couple of events because I was not.
So like in 96 in Atlanta, you won in the 800 meters. You returned the favor to Scott Hollenbeck, who beat you in Barcelona in the 800. You know, he was on the inside in Barcelona. You were on the outside, just barely. I mean, he said the finish line couldn't come up quickly enough that you were catching up to him. But at 200 meters in Atlanta, 200 meters to go, there looked like there was a little bit of hand fighting in there as you guys were getting into the turn.
I think it was elbows more than hands, but yeah, there was some contact. Scott's probably one of the guys I'm closest with and was closest with on the circuit. We would elbow each other on the track and try and crash each other if we had to, but we'd train together as well, and you know, would spend time together off the track. But it was one of the best rivalries I had in my career as well. He, like you said, he beat me in Barcelona by 7/100ths of a second. Had the race been 20 meters further, I probably would have got him. Like I was catching up to him, but I didn't, and that's how races work. And then in Atlanta, we never met until the final, but we were in opposite semifinals, and he broke the Paralympic record in his semifinal, and then 2 minutes later, in my semifinal, I rebroke the Paralympic record. So it was just this like rivalry it was such a great story. It kind of hurt even, I gotta say, like it was in Atlanta where he was living, his family was there, like it was a big race for him. And I beat him by, I think it was like you said, 8 or 9 runners in a second, just barely beat him. But it was such a great rivalry, such a great race. Yeah, I hit him hard with 200 meters to go. But he was trying to crowd me. So that's how racing goes.
It is well, that was part of your mystique too, right? That was part of the image that you cultivated, where you said you'd rather crash than lose.
Yeah, and I'm little, right? Like I weighed when I was racing at 118 pounds. I'm 5.5 feet tall, and so some of the bigger guys, like the guys who are close to 6 feet tall and 140, 150 pounds, could push me around if I let them, and so I could never let that happen. If it happened once, it was going to happen all the time. So I was probably overreactive, but I did that because I saw other little guys get pushed around. I was like, that just can't happen, because I'm going to lose races if I let that happen.
I'm just laughing because I'm actually recalling a story that you recounted to me in Birmingham at the World Championships in '98.
Yeah, that was, so Joel Jeannot is probably like, he's a mountain of a man. And in the 5,000 semis, he really wanted to put me out in the semis because he knew if I got into the final, that was where I was the strongest. So he was trying to eliminate me in the semis. And what he did was, when I got behind him, he would drop off the back of the pack and force me to chase. And so he did that a few times in the early going. And then on the last one, he hit his brakes and I slammed into the back of him. It was actually pretty dangerous. And so I went around him and tried, and I was like, look, enough's enough. And so I tried to push him into the back and take care. We ended up both progressing to the final, but on the back side of the track, I had words with him. And I think he thought I was going to slap him. I wasn't ever planning on doing that, but he flinched away from me. And it was maybe one of the most like best events of my career, where he's like 6'4", 6'5", and would have torn me to shreds. But
yeah, like one arm is longer than you are tall.
He was a monster, yeah. And then the fact that he thought I was going to slap him was just like.
Well, at least the story that you recounted to me, I think you did say that you were going to slap him in French as well.
I might have threatened to. I might have done that. I can't recall.
Well, I'm going to stick with my version of the story because it's the one I've been telling, yeah. And I think it really works.
Yeah, I got to check the statute of limitations in France for threatening assault.
Exactly. Well, it was in the UK, so it was probably fine. So right. I think it's okay. But actually, this is a bit of a diversion because you do speak French well. You're fluent in French, and there's a reason why you're fluent in French, though, right? Am I correct in this? The legend has it, and I don't know if you told me or not, that you get kicked out of your grade school and your mother was the principal of your grade school and you had to go to the French Catholic school. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty close. There was for sure a discipline issue when I was growing up, and like I said, I was always trying to get into as much trouble as I could. But I was getting in trouble at school, and my parents had heard that the French school in the community that I grew up in had better discipline, and so they decided that I was going to go to the French school for discipline. And I don't know if it worked or not. But I learned French.
Is this getting wrapped with rulers and those kinds of things?
It was that
corporal punishment.
They absolutely had corporal punishment, and we got hit with rulers and stuff like that. It was like old time discipline.
Were you worse after you ended up in a chair? I mean, were you sort of acting out more, or was that something that was just,
I don't think so. I think because as soon as sport really took over, and I think it would have taken over had I been not whether I was disabled or not, I think sport would have taken over. I just realized, when I was in my early teens, that if I wanted to succeed, I couldn't be a screw up, right? Like I just had to train hard, and
or not a complete screw up.
You
to sort of manage your time, right?
That's right. Yeah. So sport really played a big role in that. in helping me to sort of make priorities and make better decisions, or the best decision that I could at the time. So
Was sport also the thing that where you expressed your voice? Was it where you developed who you were and could demonstrate, could continue to perform?
yeah, I think so. I mean, it would be interesting to see what would happen if my career was, 10 years further on in the timeline than it was, because we didn't get a lot of opportunity to tell our story because the coverage just wasn't as good as it has been in the last number of years, and we really struggled. And I think my career, a lot of it was spent trying to garner attention for myself so I could get sponsorships, but also for the sport and to raise awareness about disability in general, and the rights of people with disabilities and patient rights and things like that. And so I was always trying to use it as a platform. Um, I don't know if we really had that much of a platform, to be honest with you. When I was racing, there's a lot more of it now. Athletes have much greater ability now to use the sport as a vehicle.
Well, it's generational as well, right? You look at a guy like an Andre Vijay who created some of his equipment to to be able to, the chairs went from, you said you had a four-wheeler to now you're far more aerodynamic, and in a lot of ways it looks like a lot of people are become part of their chair. It's a racing chair. It's not necessarily it's not necessarily something that's an addition to. It's sort of like all included, and it's progressed to that point. But then you have to go and continue to push it in your generation, and the next generations benefits from that, right?
Yeah, and the equipment part of it was one of the most interesting things for me, because the nature of the sport. I grew up as when I was 9, I acquired a disability, and things changed, right? Like, people look at you a little differently. You can't do the things that you used to be able to do. People have pre stereotypes that they rely on when they're trying to make decisions about you. And the equipment really seemed to me to be more than just a leveling of the playing field, because we had a bunch of big people, in Canada especially, who played wheelchair basketball, who were able-bodied. So we had this reverse integration happening. And from the equipment point of view, it really did more than level the playing field, because when you're racing, having smaller legs, which most people who are paralyzed have, lets you fold yourself up into this more aerodynamic position. You're carrying less weight. There's a lot of advantages to being disabled when you're talking about a racing chair. And so it was this really interesting thing that happened, where the stereotype of being less able than, in whatever context, was really turned on its head. And in a purely physical way, being disabled gave you an advantage in wheelchair racing. And so we had these people who were able-bodied, or even the people who were less disabled, who had low spinal cord injuries and could walk around, who actually were disadvantaged because they didn't have the exact right disability. And so it was interesting, where the disability itself became an advantage in a purely physical way.
In a performance way, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know of anything else in the world that's similar.
Well, and also your friends who say, "Hey, I'll come for a jog with you." Your able-bodied friends.
Yeah. Well, even on a bike, like, I had a bunch of people who, when I was at the peak of my career, they couldn't keep up on a bike, right? Like, so yeah, it was pretty funny.
Yeah, that is fun. I did the Maine Marathon one year, and I was just like I don't know, there were like 3 or 4 wheelchairs or something like that. It was just close. And I showed up, and this guy who was a volunteer, he was a bike volunteer. He said, "Well, what are you looking to do?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm looking to do like 140, 150, somewhere around there, in that area." And he said, "Oh, do you know how hilly this is?" I said, "Okay, well, that's still what I'm looking to do." And that guy ended up dropping him at like mile 12 on his
Right,
bike, and it's
right.
one of those, you're like, okay, and that I think is one of the beauties of sport, is that, one, it's the bond. You're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to go as fast as possible, where like your track athlete friends look at you and go, yeah, okay, I totally understand exactly what you're trying to do. But it also, that flipping it on its head, where it goes, oh, you're actually faster than I am. Now, in looking at your stuff, I don't know if you'd consider this. I mean, you had a great event in Sydney where you won in the 800 and the 1500. First, the only time you won the 1500 at the Paralympics, right?
That's right.
Yeah. But Gothenburg in some ways was a different kind of race for you, right? And kind of a breakout in 95, the World Championships.
Yeah, it was my breakout race. I'd had some good performances in 92 for silvers. In 94, I won the World Championships, Commonwealth Games, but I'd never really like at the IAAF where everyone was there. And everyone really wanted to win the 1500 at the Commonwealth Games. That year was really fun because Philippe Capri was sort of my main concern in that race. Scott was in the race as well, but he wasn't having as good a year as some years he's had. And so Capri was really on my mind, and he had beaten me. We had raced 4 times that year before the IAAF World Championships, and he had beaten me every time. And I was trying to figure out how to beat him, and I just couldn't figure it out. Like he would just somehow beat me at the best part of my race. Like he would out sprint me. And so I was like, man, this is like, he's beating me at my own game. Like, what am I going to do? And my coach told me that I had to beat him psychologically. And I was trying to figure out how to do that and what that really meant. And I didn't have any great ideas until the day before the race. They let us out onto the stadium track to set our compensators. So we set our steering devices for each, depending on how the curvature of the track is set up. You may have to adjust your steering, and they let us out on the stadium track the day before to set up for that.
So just describe what that means. So you're going along the straightaway and then you hit the compensator?
Yeah, so there's a steering device compensator on the chair, and they're set for either straight or turn left, because that's all you have to do on the track. And so in the straightaway, you can set that pretty much anywhere, but each track has a different curvature, so you need to custom tune how much your chair is going to turn for each track.
And to your speed as well.
Right. Yeah. So, and that was a mistake a lot of people made, is that they set their compensators and steering devices for their warm-up speed instead of their race speed. So it's a really, really critical element of making sure that you're going to have a good race. And so they turned us loose on the stadium track. And I had noticed when we got there that they had already set up the medal podiums, and I got an idea. And so instead of getting in my chair and warming up, we only had like half an hour. I waited until Capri was warming up, and I went across the track. I timed it so that when he was coming down the straightaway, I basically cut him off to go into the infield. So I knew he noticed me doing it. And I went into the infield and got up on the gold medal podium and crossed my arms and waited until he came around the next time and stared at him as he came by. And I could see him trying not to look at me, right? Like he knew I was there, but he's trying not to look at me, And just at the last second, he glanced up and looked at me, and I pointed at him. And got down and did my warm up, and then in the bus on the way back to the village, he was trying to, I guess, trying to defuse it, and so he said, "Hey, I must have felt pretty," in French. He said, "That must have felt pretty good getting up on the gold medal podium. You've never done that before, have you?" And I said, I remember this clear as it was day. I said, "Well, it's the last time you're ever going to be able to say that to me." And just the look on his face, I was like, I just won.
But then you did an atypical race there as well, right? Well, you were at the front. You were at the front in lane 2 on lane 1 and on lap 1. I mean, nobody's used to seeing you at the front of the pack.
Yeah, and it was really the only thing I hadn't tried that year. Like I tried boxing him, I tried surging, I tried all these other different things, but I had never tried to go to the front and lead and control. And I took the sprint out. Like I would start sprinting with 200 meters to go, 250 meters to go. And I think I opened up with like 500 meters to go and just took him by surprise, and was able to keep him on the outside and just push him as wide as I could. But it was everything I had. And actually, we raced twice more that season. He beat me both times at the end of it, but I put it together on the day of, just by psychologically affecting him, and then by doing something that he absolutely didn't expect.
And you could see in that last 100 meters that he was really falling apart too, that his form was falling apart. He's bouncing the front wheel all over the place, and you were just bulletproof coming through and went what, like 40, 45 seconds or something like that for that final lap?
Yeah, that was the fastest lap that I think I had ever done. First time I went 45 on a closing lap, and I did it without, I didn't draft a foot of that race. Like I was sort of on Scott's shoulder for the first lap or two, but I wasn't in a proper draft. So it was, that was one of my, I think that might have been, man, looking back, that might have been the strongest race in my career.
It looked like it to me. I mean, I've seen you race a lot, and just watching that race, it was so different than what you've done, because nobody's used to seeing you at the front, and they're like, okay, Adams is at the front. What are we gonna? What's wrong with this race? What's wrong with this picture? So
Yeah.
everybody's thinking back there, and it was a huge change, and it really was strong. But then to be able to put your fastest lap for that last 400 when you've already been at the front, and you pulled away in that last 100 meters too.
Yeah, yeah, I was really strong that year. The French guys repaid me the year after though, because they kept me out of the Olympic final. so so I might have bit off a little more than I could chew. But that's it, like that was my career, right? Like it was. I didn't make finals the next year at the Olympics after having probably the strongest race in my career in '95, and it all came down to tactics and being in the right place at the right time. And I was in the wrong place at the wrong time the next year and didn't make finals. And I guess that's part of what I loved about racing is that you just never knew. Like I never expected to win in '95, but I for sure didn't expect not to make finals in '96. So it's, yeah, you just never knew it was going to happen.
Right, and that's the thing. From 88 through 2004, there was a wheelchair demonstration event, 800 meters for the women, 1,500 meters for the men, 1,500 meters then being the marquee event on the track for the men. And what they would do is they would take the best athletes, they would do all the quarters and semis elsewhere and just bring the finals. So the final 8 athletes to the event, and so that's what Jeff's talking about, is missing out on in Atlanta, which
That's
had
right.
to be heartbreaking, right? I mean, that was because it's in North America. It's a big showcase.
And I was in shape. Like I was in really good shape that year. I mean, I won the 800 in Atlanta against Scott. So same track, same guys. The 8 and the 15, you're in equally. If you can win the 8, you can win the 15, and vice versa. And I had made finals. So I qualified. My first international 1,500 meters that I qualified for was actually the Olympic final demonstration event in 1992, and I qualified for. So here's another example of why people either really liked me or really didn't like me. Is that I'd never made a final in the 1,500 meters internationally, and showed up to the trials in Louisiana and New Orleans that year, where everyone in the world would show up to these qualifying races, and then only the top 8 would go to the Olympics. And so I showed up to the qualifying meet, trying to make the finals of the 1992 Barcelona Olympic demonstration event, with the Olympic rings tattooed on my chest, and I'd never made a final. Right? So I was, I could see the guys like Mustafa and Vijay and all these guys that I was genuinely in awe of and afraid of, but like showed up with the Olympic rings anyway. And they were looking at me like, rookie, man, like, what are you even thinking? And I ended up I qualified for the finals by 6 or 7 100ths of a second. I was the last one to qualify, and I only qualified on time. So I was the 4th place finisher in my semifinal, and was faster than the fastest loser in the other semifinal and qualified. So skin of my teeth.
And you were what, 21, 22 years old then?
21.
21 years old. Yeah. Yeah. So you're just this young punk, brash young punk who goes and tattoos the Olympic rings on his chest,
Yeah.
but then
Yeah.
pulls it off.
Yeah, and that really set the tone for, I think, the rest of my career. I was like, look, I'm going to do this. I didn't always do it, but
But
people
was that
do.
part of the mindset of like I'm going to be fit? I mean, you put in the work, obviously, but at the same time, that things could happen on the track, and that you were going to be the most brash one out there.
Yeah,
Was
there
that?
was never a question that I wasn't gonna. I wanted to win every race, and I was going to try and win every race. I think that's what I mean by it set the tone. People were just like, yeah, he's not gonna show up and not be, not try as hard as he can and do everything he can to win.
Or back off from whatever fear or whatever, worry or whatever risk of dismemberment or these kinds of things.
Yeah, people. And that's the other thing too. Like, people knew that I would crash, and I wasn't afraid to crash. And if you're not afraid to crash, then people know they can't push you around. So it's a mindset for sure.
Did you covet anybody else's skill set? Like if you could go back and say, oh, I wish I could have had his skill set. I mean, obviously you manufactured, you developed your skill set or honed it to fit what you did well. But would you have traded it for what anybody else did well?
I think if you could pick and choose, I think Scott was one of the, if not the most talented athletes on the circuit ever. He had great top speed, but he was also just so relentless. And I didn't have that real, like, I'm going to continue to hurt myself endlessly, and even if I'm not going to win. Like, if I knew I wasn't going to win, I would tend to back off. Scott would just continue to hurt himself until the very end of the race, and I just didn't have that kind of element. And if he had been healthy, if he was able to stay healthy, I think he would have had a spectacular. He had a great career, but he would have had a spectacular career. He battled with shoulder injuries a lot of the time, and that really kept him from winning a bunch of races that he probably should have won. And Blanche was, just in terms of pure athletic ability, like, just mind-blowingly talented.
So Craig Blanchett, double amputee, just, I mean, he was what, like 105 pounds and was like benching like 330 or something like that when he first came on the scene or something.
Yeah, I think he was a bit heavier than that, but it was like a triple. Yeah, he tripled his own body weight in the bench. Like, it was crazy how strong he was, and his acceleration was just like blink of an eye. He was at top speed, but again, I beat him a bunch of times, and it was always on psychologically. I always beat him. If I ever beat him, it was only because I beat him psychologically.
Well, you beat him on his track at the Prefontaine Classic, right? Hayward Field, one of the greatest tracks in the world at the University of Oregon, where Nike was born, and that was '95 as well, wasn't it? Where you beat him on that track?
Yeah, that would have been '95. So I was staying at the same hotel as Scott, and the way that race worked was it was the Nike International Prefontaine Classic, and Craig was sponsored by Nike. He was sponsored by Quickie Shadow, the racing team, and he had a couple of other sponsors that were all contributing to this prize money and bonus money that he had access to. So there was race prize money, and then there was bonus money that only he had access to from his sponsors. And so I think it was like an order of magnitude more money that he was going to win from his sponsors than the prize money. And so he flew in a bunch of guys. And were you one of the guys he flew in?
I was there. Yeah, I was there. I had a better view of the race when I watched it on my computer than I did when I was actually in the race. But yeah.
Great. But he flew out. Like, he had,
Briggs was there,
Briggs,
and Hollenbeck, Neitzel, Jacob.
Yeah. So it was a sea of, Quickie Shadow uniforms, or Quickie, I guess, at that time. And me, and I went up to Craig at the beginning of the race, and I was like, look, man, I'm in great shape, and I don't want to destroy you at home, and but I need to make money on this race. So
you're just apologizing.
Yeah, I was like, I'll lead you out, and he's like, no, I think I got this. I got my guys here. They're gonna pull me around. I was like, all right, but I'm in shape. Like, I'm just saying. And the day of the race, that race again, I did a lot of leading from the front. I just hit him with surge after surge after surge that he wasn't expecting, and ended up winning that. It was a mile race, and beat him on his home track, took away his world record, and took away a lot of prize money from him. That he didn't make any money that day, so it was a tough day for Craig.
And I think that was the first time he'd ever lost at that race. And he had, I mean, Craig was brash as well, right? He had at one point had won that race and unzipped his suit and had a Superman emblem that Connie Hansen, that Kevin Hansen's wife had done in like, in like makeup and lipstick and stuff like that, I think, so Craig had his brash moments as well.
Yeah, he and I were, I mean, I think we had a lot of mutual respect. We certainly do now. But at the time, it was, who could be, it was an immovable object and an irresistible force, basically, on who had the bigger, brasher ego at that point. I think he might have even had an upper hand on me.
Well, and also who could back it up too, right? It didn't matter how brash you were.
100%, yeah.
You had to
Yeah.
get to the finish line first.
Yeah.
So after the games, why did you decide to climb the CN Tower?
So it was a couple of things. That we did that in 2002.
So you're still competing.
Yeah, but I had a wrist injury, and so I wasn't training at top capacity. And I knew I needed to take a year off racing. Maybe not necessarily a year off training, but I needed to tone things down a little bit in terms of training and racing. And so I had gone out to a friend's birthday party and had gone downstairs into a place in Toronto where the birthday celebration was happening, and was asked to leave because I was a fire hazard. And so, and
can you describe how you go downstairs?
Yeah, so I basically going down, I just hold the handrail and lower myself down a step at a time. And to go back up, I turn around and pull myself up by the handrail on a sort of reverse wheelie, going up each stair. And so I can go up and down stairs independently in my wheelchair. And the owner of the bar didn't realize this and came up to me and told me that he was and told me that he didn't want me to be downstairs at his venue because the venue wasn't accessible, and because it wasn't accessible, he considered that I was a fire hazard being down there and asked me to leave. And so I left because what else I'm going to argue, the guy in his own bar. So I left, but I took all my friends with me, which you've met my friends, and they probably would have paid his rent for the month.
Bad decision.
Yeah. So we went somewhere else to drink that night. And I went to my brother, who's a lawyer, a litigation lawyer, and talked to him about it. And as any good litigation lawyer does, he encouraged me not to go to court, but to try to figure out a way to resolve the issue. And what we decided to do was an event that would raise awareness to just to sort of highlight the idea that sometimes people are able to do things that you don't expect them to be able to do, especially people with disabilities, and to raise awareness for the need that despite that, we need better accessibility, better physical accessibility, so ramps and elevators and things like that, and to broadcast this message and to raise money for a kids outreach program that was administered by Variety Village. I did a climb of the CN Tower, which is, I think most people know, Toronto has the CN Towers, was the tallest freestanding structure in the world at the time, and had 1,776 stairs that were in the inside. It was basically an escape route in case of an emergency, but I climbed those stairs in a specially modified wheelchair and did an event that, like I said, raised awareness and a bit of money for accessibility awareness.
And so this chair, you used like a crutch on one side and the railing on the other side, and kind of did dips. Is that what you did, or?
Yeah, it was a pediatric sized wheelchair that I put little 18-inch BMX wheels on the back and converted the axle to only roll backwards on unidirectional bearings. And so when I went up the stair in the chair, I would lift myself up using the railing on one side and a little crutch on the other. And then the wheels wouldn't roll forward, so I couldn't roll back down the stair. So I'd roll up each stair, basically doing a dip to get myself up each stair.
So they were ratcheted, and you did 1,776 dips.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a long day.
Over how many? How long did it take you?
Well, it's funny, like, because we got into the stairwell, and there are no landmarks. Like, they don't mark the stair. It's just an escape route. So the only marker is at the halfway point, and so we didn't really know where we were until we got to the halfway point. And I did the first half in like like 45 minutes. But we had a media conference scheduled at the top for 3 o'clock. We started at 10 a.m. thinking it might take all day. And then I had this media conference scheduled at 3 for the top. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to show up and nobody's going to be there. And then so we started talking about it. I'm like, well, I can't climb to the top and wait there because I'm going to show up and not even going to be out of breath. And like, I want to be sweating out of breath when I finish for the media to make things look. So we sat in the
There's
middle.
a performer in you. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So we sat in the middle, for hours and told jokes and waited for 45 minutes before the conference was scheduled and pounded up the last half so I could show up looking tired and sweaty.
So it really took you an hour and a half. Okay.
Yeah. But my one regret to this day is that I think I could have done it twice. And I wish now that I had sort of gone to the top, taken the elevator back down and did it twice. And I wouldn't have told anybody, but just for myself, if I could have said, yeah, I did it twice.
Well, that story probably would have gotten out there too. Like, I think we saw him going to the elevator and, wondering if there's a Rosie Ruiz moment or something like that. Like, is this guy just riding the elevator to the top? How's it working? No, I did it twice. You didn't do it twice. Come on.
Yeah, that's true. I don't fly under the radar that well either, right? Because in the wheelchair.
No. I think you would have been fairly conspicuous. What was the outcome? How did that work out? I mean, you put a lot of work into this. What was the result? What was the conversation?
It was good. I mean, we got I think we calculated we got over $1 million in value in kind advertising out of it, so that the message got out. We created a school outreach program that the Variety Village, which is a facility in Toronto that caters to people with disabilities. It's a sports facility. They administered a school outreach program for a number of years with funding that we raised during that program. So we were able to, and I really think like in situations like that where you're trying to create a message, trying to make social change happen, it has to happen through education, and it has to happen with kids. Like it's the only chance we have. You and I aren't changing our minds about a whole lot right now, right? Like
we're jaded and old and all that stuff. Yeah.
So you got to educate kids, and so we broadcast the message. But we delivered it specifically to kids as well. So hopefully it made some small difference.
How does that work, right? Because you're talking about accessibility, right? Improving accessibility, which I'm guessing is really more on the opportunity side of things. Like, don't deny people an opportunity or don't make these assumptions, which is part of, I mean, you're fairly iconoclast, right? I think that word might fit. And so I think that part of it is breaking that perception, breaking that facade that people have. But then there's the other side of like, well, but nobody else is going to climb 1,776 steps. I mean, it's like it's this. You're an outlier on the other end as the super crip kind of thing. And how do you reconcile that? And how are you leveraging your celebrity to benefit other people?
Yeah, and that's a really, really pertinent issue, is that like, and that was one of the things that one of the less, or I guess a negative outcome that happened from the climb. Like even friends of mine years later would be like, oh, we're gonna go to this restaurant and it's got stairs, but you climb the CN Tower, so of course you can get up the. I'm like, that's not the point.
I don't want to have to do it.
Yeah, right. So, but there was also the community, and they were right that this idea of in the context of a highly able person within the context of disability doing something that probably no other person could do, and it's just because of my specific disability, the fact that I was in shape from training for so many years. I had a technical background, like everything came together that I could do this climb. But it may not have. There was a message that got communicated that was not necessarily the best one for the disability community in general. And I think, if nothing else, and for what it's worth, it really made me more alive to that issue. And so in subsequent years, I was a little more aware of that issue. But yeah, there was a lot of comments that came back to me saying, and the term super crip got thrown around a lot. And it's funny, like It's tough because, and I've always tried, I've always taken the position whenever I'm working on accessibility and trying to bring as many people with different disabilities to the table, because I don't know any more than a person who doesn't have a disability what a blind person needs, or a person who's deaf or hard of hearing, or I don't understand those disabilities any better than I understand my own disability. And so you really need to make sure that those voices with the experiential understanding of these situations and specific disabilities are heard and have a voice too. And so that was one thing, just in terms of personal growth, that negative effect helps me to understand that a little bit better.
I always find that that's one of the challenges too, because you don't want to grade the whole world, right? Like let's just smooth everything out. We'll pave everything. Everything will be perfect. I mean, there some of the imperfections in our lives are really ultimately, and the imperfections in our world are some of what make it beautiful too, right?
Yeah, and you can't make everything accessible, and what's accessible to one person isn't accessible to another, and that's part of the problem with this. Like people say, "Hey, is this place accessible?" It's like, for some people it is. So, it's never accessible for everybody, and so just figuring out where that line is and where that stick in the mud is one of the biggest problems in addressing accessibility issues.
But it's also it gets to more of a universal type of issue too, doesn't it? I mean, it's like it's a human condition kind of thing. Not everything fits every human being either, right? I mean, it's can you expand this, or have you tried to expand this to a more universal kind of message, that it's not us against them, as opposed to it's like, hey, we're all in this together, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And more and more, I'm sort of subscribing to the, we went through, the medical model of disability that, is subscribed to by, especially in the early days, the IPC. And then there's a social model of disability that says that, disability is a construct, and that we can, by making societal changes, we can eliminate disability, which I really don't think is the case. Like I'm never going to be able to go across a field with big ruts in it, without specific equipment to help me. Although you did that one time up a mountain, I think.
I did
But
have some fairly specific equipment.
yeah, so as better than anyone probably that the equipment really can make a big difference, but you needed a team of people helping you, and so there are things that I'm always going to need people to help me with. And that, I think, goes to your message that we're in this together, because there's things that I can help people with as well. And so if we recognize that, and just recognize this social contract that we have, I think that gets us a lot of the way there.
I think so. I think for me, it's one of the things that I look at, and I've done a lot of thinking on this. I mean, obviously, you and I are put into a position where we didn't ask to join this group, and you become an advocate for a group you didn't want to join, and trying to figure out, how does that work? How do I reconcile it on in terms of who I am and who I want to be, and all of these things, and so I try to look at what do we share. I think that so often with change, we look at it and go, oh well, you have to recognize me for who I am, and none of us like to be told what to do, or told that we're wrong. So even if it makes sense, to your point, why talk to kids versus adults? Like, adults are going, yeah, I'm not going to, no, sorry, that doesn't fit the way that I think about the world. So you must be wrong. And trying to figure out how to make that work. But I think we're in the position where we've had to adapt. And equipment, you mentioned equipment. And after you retired, you went and tried to make a better mousetrap, really, right? I mean, a better wheelchair.
Yeah, we started. So when I was retired, when I was getting close to the end of my career, I realized I needed to have some kind of a exit strategy. And so my former business partners, we've both since moved on from this company, but my former business partner came to me with an idea to build an adjustable wheelchair, and it was for people who had were newly disabled, had recent injuries, and didn't really know how they wanted to sit in their chairs, what configuration they needed.
How important is that to figure out how to say it, how you're most comfortable or most performance oriented?
Well, it's incredibly important. I mean, and I always try to draw the parallel for people. Like, it's the same as a pair of shoes. If your shoes don't fit, you can still, or soccer boots. If your soccer boots are 2 sizes too big, you're still playing soccer. You're just not having a whole lot of fun doing it, right? And you're not going to score too many goals. So it's not like you're not, if your boots are too big, you can still get around in them. If your wheelchair is too big, you can still get around in it. It's not maximizing your efficiency, and you're not going to have a whole lot of fun. And so we tried to use a lot of the
So,
technology.
but I think there's something with wheelchairs that you're risking health issues too, right? I mean, the other attendant issues where your posture can change, which then you can start ending up with, kyphosis, these kinds of things. You could end up bending of the spinal cord. You can end up with pressure sores. You can do a variety of other things. Plus, just the comfort of being around it. What's the objective to fit a wheelchair?
I think you're exactly right. And the other thing is that those attendant issues change over time, right? So what's working for someone in week 1 post injury versus month 1 versus year 1, and then 5 years down the road are often entirely different things. And so you've got this nexus of funding issues, attendant issues that affect you physically, your mental well-being of being able to move around as best you can, and then change over time, that at the time of injury, nobody can predict which way that's going to go. And so what we tried to do is create an adjustable chair that would be reconfigurable over time, so that, and it wasn't going to be, a high performing chair for someone who's been in a chair for 20 years, but for a newly injured person who didn't know what they needed. That was sort of the intent, just to get people off on the right track and make sure that they were able to at least experiment to see what would work best for them.
Yeah. And like for me, I had my accident at 20 years old. My first wheelchair was 16 inches wide, which was kind of the standard. And some of the message was, well, you're going to grow into it. And I had stopped growing. At least I hoped I had stopped growing. I'd stopped growing vertically, at least, hopefully not horizontally. But my chair now is 14 inches wide. And when you look at that and you say, okay, why would you want something that's that narrow? And you want it to fit you like your clothing. You want it to respond as you respond, but also the narrowest doorways in every house that you go into are the bathrooms. And you don't want to have to get on the floor to get into the bathroom. So you're doing a great service to these people and letting them figure out and play with on a relatively easy, it's not like they have to have an engineering degree to be able to set their chair up, to set their everyday chair up.
Yeah, we tried to make the adjustments happen in as simple a way as possible. That neither we started 2 companies. One was called Marvel, and one was called Icon, and neither one of them were very successful for a variety of reasons. But the industry, part of it was that the industry just really didn't understand this idea of adjustability, and previous attempts had been made to make things adjustable, but they had been poorly executed, and so they would tend to come loose and things like that. And people in the industry just were not ready to accept that, we can have this adjustability. And we always kept trying to point out to them that, like, your bike is entirely adjustable and it doesn't rattle loose. Your car is adjusts, it's got tons of moving parts and bolts and nuts, and it doesn't rattle loose. So there's a way to do it, and none of our chairs ever rattled loose, but the industry just wasn't ready to accept it. And again, I think this goes back maybe to a point you made earlier, where I was sort of the face of the company, and I was this high performing athlete, and people just assumed that I was making a chair for high performance and athletics, and it wasn't. It was the other end of the spectrum, and people just weren't grasping that this was a chair for people who had just injured themselves, and we're still trying to figure things out.
Yeah, this isn't a sports car. This is an everyday utility car. You were up against the big boys though, too, right? I mean, the thing is, the industry is dominated by gigantic companies, and a lot of it's pretty cookie cutter, right? That it's just they're just producing widgets. And so you guys had to be on the edge of innovation, didn't you?
Yeah, and there was, I'm out of the industry now, so I can be honest. Um, there was a lot of really dirty pool going on. Like we would show up to in services with at rehab centers, and we talked to the therapists that were prescribing authorities, and they'd say, "Oh, we were told you guys went out of business," and we're like, "Who told you that?" And there would be reps from other companies that were competing against our product, and we didn't have 8 different things. We didn't have a tilt in space, and all these other different types of products that would give other manufacturers sort of a one-stop shop lineup that they could provide. And so we were really relying on this one product, and it was a very niche product as well. And then we were facing all kinds of really sort of bad behavior from established players in the industry, and not necessarily from corporate front office or the corporate offices, but people on the ground, the reps, and people like that were. It was disappointing in a lot of ways.
The people who are trying to make their quotas.
Exactly.
Yeah, that you are challenging their quotas or providing competition, and you're the new people on the block. And so what ended up happening? You ended up selling both companies, didn't you, or getting acquired, or how did that work?
Yeah, the first company ended quite badly. We were in partnership with a bicycle company called Cervelo, and they got into some financial difficulties and tried to take over the company. Well, did take over the company and tried to flip it and tried to sell it to fund some of to bridge some of the financial gaps that they had created in their bike company. And so as soon as they seized control of the company, they cut Christian. Christian Bag was my business partner. They cut us loose and tried to run the company. And as soon as the industry found out that the two guys in wheelchairs were no longer part of the wheelchair company, it just didn't go that well for them. So we immediately just started another company called Icon that was more successful, but still didn't break through that glass ceiling in terms of the established players in the market. So we eventually started making other products, including an electric bike, and then Christian and I decided to part ways. I decided I wanted to exit the industry entirely, and I went to law school about 3 years ago, and he's still running a company that makes electric bikes called Bowhead.
And so you went to law school, and you were hopefully going to pass the bar this summer, right?
Yeah, fingers crossed.
And you'll be 50 in November.
Yes. Yeah, so I think if I'd left it even another couple of years, it would have been too late. And to be candid, I wish I had done this 10 years ago. It's really something that fits my personality. Law is something I've always been interested in. Up till now, I seem to be relatively good at it. Didn't fail any of my courses. So that's a good sign.
Is it you like to win, or that you like to argue?
Well, it can be both, Chris. It can really be both. You know what it is, like in everything I've done, and we've touched on this in the last hour or so, is that when I was racing, I was trying to use the platform to help people, to broadcast this idea that disability rights are human rights, and those are important. And then when I made this, created these companies, I was trying to help people to get into the best chairs they could have, and it's the same thing now. Like my clients right now come to me with issues and problems, and I try to help them. And that's really what law is. It's just, if you're a good lawyer, all you want to do is help people to resolve their issues and problems, and help them lead the best lives that they can. So, my direction is going to be in constitutional litigation and human rights, as well as some, some labor employment law, and areas where I think I can help people. And so I think that's the consistent thread that runs throughout. But I do like to argue.
You're starting a career at 50 that most people start in their 20s. You're joining a big law firm, right? I mean, you've gone to a great law school, and now you're. So I mean, Osgoode Hall is one of the best, and it's old. Like this is the kind of school that you would say that when you're leaving college, like this is the direction that I'm going to go. So it's kind of like you've taken a step back to a certain extent, in recreating where you would go from your college step, like to the best school you can, and then joining a 200 person law firm in the middle of the financial district.
700.
700. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, apparently I was looking at the wrong place on the website. But like this
Yeah,
is this is the corporate. You're in the middle of the financial district in Toronto, and are they giving you the sleeping bag and the cot when you start, or how is that working? Are you going to be billing all those hours? And
well, it's funny, so I worked last summer in my between my second and third years, and I was doing 80, 70, 80-hour weeks, which I was doing in my with the wheelchair companies anyway. So working those hours isn't foreign to me. And when Christian came to me with the idea to start a company back in 2006, I had actually written the LSAT, the entry exam for law schools, and had done well enough to probably get in. And he came to me just when I was about to start my applications, and gave me this, pitched me this idea of starting a company, and I decided to do that instead of going to law school. So it's not a new idea, but it was definitely getting to the point where I needed to do it, or it wasn't going to happen. And it's been fascinating, like getting back into this environment of learning after so many years, and being surrounded by young people who are clearly smarter than I am. Has been, honestly, it's been very humbling. Um,
well, you're
which
out of it to a certain extent, right? You haven't been in school, and so there's just a different mode of thinking. You continue to read, you continue to write, you continue to do these things in your adult life, but there's something entirely different about being in school and just sort of the momentum of it.
And I never, ever, ever read the way I've read for law school. Like it's bonkers. Um, and I'll never, yeah, it's really interesting. When I first got in, I was like, wow, this is happening. It's great. But there's this one moment where I went to my first class, and I had my laptop and I had my pad of paper, and I didn't know if I was going to take notes on the laptop or on the pad of paper. And I was trying to decide, and the lecture started, and I was like, oh, wow, I'm at law school. This is so great. And then the instructor, the professor, said something literally noteworthy, and everyone started typing on their keyboards.
Just click, click,
And
click, click. Yeah.
yeah, and last time I was in school, we didn't have laptops. Like they didn't exist, and so it hadn't dawned on me that that was the case. And there was this moment where this noise rose, and it was like locusts, like just the tapping of 500 people on a keyboard at the same time. And that noise really was the thing that crystallized it for me. Where I was like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like this is actually happening. So yeah, it was just this weird foreign thing that we didn't like. It had been so long we didn't have laptops last time I went to school.
What was their impression of you, the other students, like looking at you going, whose father, whose grandfather is this here?
Well, I just had a conversation with a person who's a good friend of mine now, and she was like, the first 3 weeks, she kept like, what the hell is this other professor doing spying on us? Like, why is he sitting in the middle of the class spying on us? This is bullshit. Like, they shouldn't let other professors into, and like, she just like assumed that I was a professor. And now, and when I was working last summer, I'd go into these like arbitration meetings or client meetings, and everyone would be deferring to me and looking to me like I had any idea what was going on, and I knew what was happening. And I'm like, no, that she's the senior lawyer here. I'm a student. I'm
The
taking notes.
28-year-old's the senior lawyer here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that too, like, so, I'm taking direction from people who could be my kids, right? Like I'm taking direction from 25, 26 year olds that are brilliant and genius. And I think, I didn't retire till I was 20 or 38. And so I was still in contact with young people, teenagers and early 20s. And so I'm comfortable dealing with young people. But for a lot of people who are young, pushing 50, taking direction from someone who's 26, 27 is a real gut check. Um, I've been able to do it, and I have no problem doing it, but it's an interesting process.
I would imagine. Was it difficult for you? You went from competing to Marvel, which I'm assuming is a bit of a nod to your comic book uh, enjoyment. I'm assuming, and you did that at Marvel and Icon and kind of did those things, and then now you're actually sort of starting your career. What will be the rest of your career, most likely, because even like as an athlete, at some point you're done. You are not going to retire from being an athlete, unless you're Heinz Fry, I think, from
Right.
being an athlete, and just to that's it, you're done. I mean, Heinz, probably a guy who raced with us, Swiss guy who is still going at like 65 years old or something like that, and still beating many
Yeah.
many people in the world. But and then with the companies, you probably knew that was a relatively short term kind of thing, that it wasn't necessarily. But now getting into this is the full time. Was it difficult to leave sport and then to essentially find what you're going to do with the rest of your life?
For me, it wasn't. Even when we started the companies, like I was doing all of the legal stuff. Like I was running the business side of the companies, and it was a highly regulated industry. It's medical products, and so I had to learn regulatory law, and we were hiring people, and so I had to learn employment law, and it was bootstrapping, so we couldn't afford, a lot of lawyers in the early days. And it really just kind of gelled and solidified this idea that I'd already written the LSATs, and I was doing this this entrepreneur effort, but I was doing all the legal stuff, and it was what I really enjoyed. So I am new to the legal profession, but I've done a lot of legal work both as a client and as an entrepreneur, where I know the issues, and I think going, and I've already seen it, where going into some meetings and things like that, like the maturity helps, and I don't get sidetracked in the same way that some of my younger colleagues do, and I don't get pushed around the same way that some of my colleagues do. Like I've appeared on a couple of matters, one where the judge assumed that I was experienced counsel, and I had to make sure she understood that I wasn't. But like I've done things in my first year that most new lawyers couldn't, because I've had life experience that helps, and especially in negotiations. Like I can talk about this because I was acting acting on my own, um, for myself,
Representing yourself as an athlete,
representing. No, I was representing myself as in terms of my business,
right?
but I had to negotiate with very experienced counsel, and so we hammered out a deal. It wasn't friendly, but at the end of it, he came up and said, you did a really good job, and that was, just because he knew that I was going into law, and so it was a really interesting thing where he was hammering me as hard as he could. Then when it was over, he came over and gave me advice in terms of how to negotiate in a legal sense. But he also said that he could tell that I'd done negotiations before. So like 25-year-olds just haven't had the time to do that. So it's a new career for me, but it's based on a good foundation, I think.
But pointing you in that direction, it's confirmation in a lot of ways too, right? That you're going in the right direction, that it's what you want to do, and what you probably should do.
Yeah, and I can tell, like I'm old enough now that I don't do things that I don't want to do, or unless I have to. But if I can tell when something fits, and I think sometimes is like I look at some of my colleagues at school where I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna be you. Like it's maybe it will be, but for me, I just know it's a good fit. I know it's gonna work. So, and I think that comes with experience and age.
What are you looking for in the future? I mean, in some ways, you've been writing the same story since you were 9 years old, right? And what is this chapter of that story? Or what is this iteration of that story look like? What do you want it to look like?
Well, I mean, I think I built my career and my experience on trying to promote the idea that like trying to promote human rights and trying to ensure that the rights of people with disabilities are recognized within that context. And at some point you run into a glass ceiling. Like, you can only do so much as an athlete. And say, hey, this is the thing to do. We need to pay attention. And as a business owner, you can, help to lobby and do things like that. But until you have law on your side, you can't really make systemic and permanent change. And so this is the culmination, I think, of my career, where I'm going to be able to not just say that it's the right thing, but make sure that the right thing is done as well.
So final question: what is the one skill that you think you will have to develop in order to be really successful?
I think I'm going to have to tone down my confidence. One of the big things about law that I've found is that if you can't fake it, right? Like, either the law is on your side or it's not, and either the facts are on your side or they're not. And you can pull off some spectacular wins by sleight of hand and by being a crafty lawyer.
This is what we see in the movies and on television and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, like it just doesn't happen in real life. And so this idea that you can go in and just be like, oh, I'm going to win this one, it doesn't work that way, right? Like, so you have to. So my skills in terms of negotiation and trying to resolve things, I think, have been the one thing I'm working the most on, because in racing, I didn't want to resolve things. I just wanted to win the race. Like, and the more I could hurt people, the better. Right?
It was the opposite of resolving things. Yes.
Yeah.
Instigator,
Yeah,
I believe, was one of the, yeah.
Yeah. So, and in business too, like in business, often you can go in and just like, you can tell people you got the best product in the world. And if they believe you, they're going to buy it. Right. And then you work to try to make sure that's the case. But in law, you just can't fake it. And so sometimes it reminds me of judo more than anything. There's the time to resist and there's the time to yield. And understanding when those two moments are happening is critical.
That's awesome. So tell us when are you doing the bar? Because thank you for taking 2 hours out of your day to talk with us when you should be studying.
Yeah, I should be. But so I write the bar mid-July. There's 2 sittings. So there's 2 7-hour tests that are 2 weeks apart. And then I start work at Fasken in Toronto in probably late August. Everything's a little bit up in the air now with COVID stuff going on.
Sure.
And we're trying to bring all the exams online instead of in person. So but it'll be mid-July for the bar and late August for work.
So you'll actually potentially take the bar at your apartment or at your house or whatever?
Almost certainly. Yeah. Almost
really?
Certainly. Yeah, I did. We did all of the final exams for law school in my living room. It was actually really strange to, I hit send and my last exam went off and I was done law school in the middle of my living room. wasn't the finish I expected, but
that is funny. So Lincoln helped you celebrate. You have I don't
know,
huge love of these guys, right?
I don't know.
What's your dog of choice?
Yeah, well, he's a Great Dane. He's sleeping on the couch right here. So, but I don't know how people with kids are doing it, man. Like, it's like trying to concentrate at home is very difficult. Yeah, so he's about as much distraction as I can handle.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck in riding the bar. Good luck in starting your new career. It seems like you're well suited for it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. So we'll wish you good luck.
All right. It's great catching up with you, Chris. Take care.
Always a pleasure. Take care. All right. Thanks.